Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will hear testimony on how emerging maritime technologies can improve the efficiency and performance by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard performs many important missions, from defense readiness and migrant and drug interdictions to search and rescue operations and fisheries law enforcement. However, since 2010, annual administration requests for the Coast Guard have not been adequate for the service to acquire new assets to perform its 11 missions at a rate that keeps up with those mission needs. The subcommittee has urged the Coast Guard to strongly advocate for the resources it needs to acquire the assets necessary to conduct its missions. The National Security Cutter Acquisition Program has exceeded the program of record. The Fast Response Cutter Acquisition Program is getting close to completing the program of record, while the Offshore Patrol Cutter and Polar Icebreaker acquisition programs are only just beginning. The reality of the Coast Guard's operational situation is that even with new assets, the Coast Guard has a big job to do. This subcommittee recognizes that technology can be a tool to fill any operational gaps in a cost-effective manner. Unmanned systems, navigation technologies, and new cell phone technologies are all tools that the Coast Guard can use to improve their mission performance. These technologies can improve the Coast Guard's maritime domain awareness and help the Coast Guard more effectively target the use of expensive manned assets. The Coast Guard needs to use every tool out there. The Coast Guard cannot accomplish all their missions by simply putting their servicemen and women on cutters, helicopters, and planes. The service needs to be smart and strategic about where to place its assets and use its personnel. This is where data and technology can help. For example, Indonesia has partnered with Google to catch illegal fishing in real time. Google co-founded Global Fishing Watch, an online mapping platform. Fishermen or pirates turn off their tracking system when they are illegally fishing, but Google's mapping platform is able to use machine learning to study vessel movement patterns to locate them. This is all done using government-owned vessel monitoring system data in the mapping platform and adding new raw satellite imagery to produce a detailed footprint of fishing activities, revealing 5,000 previously invisible boats and allowing Indonesian law enforcement to address illegal fishing in its waters. This subcommittee will keep pushing the Coast Guard to be innovative. The types of technologies we will discuss today can help the Coast Guard strategically and more effectively use its assets. There is no replacement for trained and capable service members, but if the Coast Guard makes better use of technology, they can make service members' jobs more effective and safer. I held a roundtable in San Diego in February and met with a variety of companies that are working on new maritime technologies. I know we have some of those panel members with us today, as well as other experts, and I look forward to learning about the new current technologies that exist right now and the technologies that the Coast Guard is using and working on to use in the future. Lastly, I want to say when we were at the, it's called the Joint, the Joint Command Center there in San Diego, where the Coast Guard operates out of, and you have a Harbor Police desk inside the Coast Guard Operations Center where you can see the entire Coronado Bay, all of the San Diego Bay, all the Naval Institution, everything. You can see around the entire area in real time, and the Coast Guard cameras are operated by National Guardsmen. And when the two National Guardsmen that were watching the Coast Guard cameras, this was about 2 months ago, left to go to Ukraine, I think, or Georgia to help train people, those 2 seats were empty. Coast Guard didn't have anybody there. So even with the technology and the cameras and the assets to be able to look at the entire San Diego Bay, they were saying, well, that's great, but we can't do it because we lack 2 people. So that wasn't a technology issue, that was a manning problem, which they're fixing now. But it was great to see at least that technology being in place where they're tied in with the Harbor Police and everybody else in the San Diego Bay region. So I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts on these issues, and I yield to Ranking Member Garamendi. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. I appreciate the opportunity to delve into these blue technologies, discuss their potential to transform how we envision both the maritime infrastructure and emerging information systems and the technologies that drive advancements in science and industry. Hearing couldn't come soon enough. Over the past decade, countries around the world, especially China and the European Union, have turned their attention to their coasts and oceans to investigate the potential of maritime-related industries, ocean resources, as a major source of new jobs and economic growth. The U.S. would be well advised not to ignore this push by other nations to expand their economic opportunities in the maritime economy. If we do ignore it, we risk falling behind the development, testing, and deployment of the new blue technologies driven by marine data that's easily accessible, interoperable, and we squander future opportunities to develop new products, services, and applications to strengthen and diversify our maritime economy. Fortunately, many of the folks here have not been sitting idly on the sidelines. In fact, each of our witnesses here this morning can attest to numerous achievements thus far and examples of innovation. For instance, a leading edge, very high frequency modulated VHF FM communication systems known as Rescue 21 is the Coast Guard's new advanced command control directional finding communication system that's enabled the Coast Guard to execute its search and rescue missions with far greater agility and efficiency. Another example is the Physical Oceanographic Real-Time System, or the PORTS system, a decision support tool developed by the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration that improves the safety and efficiency of the maritime commerce and coastal resource management through the integration of real-time environmental observations, forecasts, and geospatial information. I'm sure we'll hear from witnesses about these and other activities. A recent article in the Maritime Executive focused on Russian activities in the Baltic and Eastern Mediterranean to jam and disrupt GPS systems that vessels rely upon. And we'll explore some of that with our witnesses. Considering that many blue technology systems rely on satellite telemetry and precision signals for timing, navigation, communication, what would happen to these new assets, whether they are unmanned gliders or maritime electronic navigational systems, if their GPS signals were disrupted, either intentionally or unintentionally? Presently, the U.S. has no active domestic backup timing and navigational system should GPS go down, and I think you've heard me speak on this before, so I won't go on further to say that former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter said it correctly. GPS is a single point of failure. So, a piece of work we need to do. Fascinating hearing. We're going to hear from others. There's so much that we need to do in this domain and in this area so that the blue technology systems are American and used by our mariners and our military. So with that in mind, let me conclude by welcoming our witnesses. Look forward to hearing from you, and I hope to engage all of you in questions. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from California. And this is a great panel, which we have one person, Rear Admiral Michael. Oh, hey, Mr. DeFazio is recognized for opening statement.
It's early, Duncan. Thank you. Thanks very much for having this hearing. You know, this is an area where the government should be investing a significant amount more money in acquiring new technologies, not just for the Coast Guard, but for those who research the oceans. I mean, 70% of the Earth's surface, ocean. We've explored thoroughly about 10% of it, and 50 to 80% of the life on Earth exists in the oceans. We're a maritime nation. It's incredibly critical to our future that we not be left and mired in the 20th century when other nations are employing 21st century technology to better understand our oceans and in some cases exploit our oceans, in some cases exploit to the point of being unsustainable. We need to better understand the majority of the Earth's surface. And I really want to thank the chairman for holding the hearing, and I want to acknowledge Dr. Tuba Oskin-Haller. She's a professor of civil and construction engineering at Oregon State University. She's the associate dean of the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. We had a little brief discussion beforehand. I know that for one thing, we have underfunded, the deep ocean buoys. I've been working both for earthquake detection, remote sensing out near the where the tectonic plates meet off the northern California, southern Oregon coast. And I've also been very concerned about the lack of capability of just doing more mundane things like detecting wave heights and directions and that for, for coastal shipping, safety of mariners and others, and also so we can better understand these oceans if we want to deploy or hope to deploy wave generation systems or wind generation systems on the ocean surface. We need to know a lot more about what's going on out there. So I think this is critical for the Coast Guard, critical for the United States of America, critical for the future of our economy. With that, I thank the chairman and yield back the balance of my time.
thank the ranking member of the full committee for being here. It's always a great honor to have him and shine some light on what we're doing here as well. I just want to say, when I got into this about 6 years ago when I became the subcommittee chairman, I had gone to somewhere in Silicon Valley and saw a thing that the guy that invented Java was working on floating surfboards that can sense oil in the water and have sensors on it and can drive themselves infinitely for a long time. So I came back, and it was one of my first subcommittee hearings here, and I asked the Coast Guard, we went through all the language in Coast Guard regulations to see what they would classify that as, and it came back as floating debris, is what the Coast Guard lawyers would call the guy who invented Java's surfboard that can sense stuff. It was classified as floating debris. That was 6 years ago, and I think things have changed. So if you could tell us how things have changed, it'd be great. Rear Admiral Michael Haycock, Assistant Commandant for Acquisition and Chief Acquisition Officer for the United States Coast Guard, you're recognized. Thank you for being here.
Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, distinguished members of the subcommittee, Congressman DeFazio, thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Coast Guard's ongoing efforts to pursue new technologies and solutions that have great potential to enhance our mission success. I thank you for your oversight and your continued support of our service, and I ask that my full written testimony be included as part of the official record. As the Assistant Commandant for Acquisition...
Do you mind pulling the microphone a little bit closer to you, too? Thank you.
Is this better? As the Assistant Commandant for Acquisition, I have several opportunities to testify before this body on Coast Guard's programs to revitalize our aging fleet of cutters and aircraft, boats, and support systems. And with the support of the Congress, and especially this subcommittee, we are making real progress towards delivering the assets and the capabilities that our men and women in the field need to execute the missions for the American people. Our continued operational success will require a broad portfolio of complementary programs and activities that are built upon a foundation of innovation, integration, and strategic vision. One such program is the Coast Guard's Office of Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, which supports research and innovation across the entire span of the Coast Guard's missions. The Coast Guard RDT&E project portfolio is closely aligned with the mission needs and the priorities that are identified by our operational community. Because the program is relatively modest, we are constantly looking at ways to best leverage partnerships with DHS and DoD research entities, national laboratories, academia, and industry to best support the Coast Guard's needs. One example of leveraging partnerships is our Research and Development Center's effort with DHS Science and Technology Directorate to form the DHS Coast Guard Science and Technology Innovation Center, also known as the STIC. This joint Coast Guard and DHS team is focused on rapidly transitioning innovative technologies into the hands of our operational community. We're also working with DHS Centers of Excellence on projects related to maritime cybersecurity and in the Arctic as well. We're also at the table with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA, to look at counter-UAS systems. We've conducted in-situ burning testing at the Joint Maritime Test Facility, Mobile, Alabama, through partnerships with entities such as the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement and the Naval Research Laboratory. We also collaborate with industry through numerous cooperative research and development agreements, also known as CRADAs. These agreements are mutually beneficial in providing industry partners with access to real-world requirements while keeping the Coast Guard abreast of the latest developments in technology. We have formalized these cooperative R&D agreements with industry leaders such as Mercury Marine, Lockheed Martin, ConocoPhillips, and several others. And right now, we're looking at a number of ways to increase the number of partnerships with smaller, innovative technology companies as well. This year marks the RDT&E program's 50th anniversary, and throughout the program's history, it has delivered products and capabilities that are vital to carrying out our Coast Guard missions. Projects have been driven by events such as Exxon Valdez, hurricane responses, Deepwater Horizon, and the recent sinking of the SS El Faro. We've led research in oil spill mitigation, development of electronic navigation, and other research areas important to mariner safety and commerce. Last year was one of our busiest years to date. When the Coast Guard swung into action as Hurricane Harvey swept through the Gulf Coast, the RDT&E program was there. We used our innovative crowdsourcing platform to collect real-time lessons learned from responders on scene. The responders told us stories about sending 50 small rescue boats and 28 helicopters into the storm with limited ability to track the rescuers or the assets that they were in. The Research and Development Center in New London, Connecticut immediately sprung into action and began prototyping small, affordable, off-the-shelf tracking devices that can provide our operation commanders with options for greater situational awareness, even under the most challenging of conditions. The program is nimble and it's able to respond quickly. In addition to meeting emergent needs, the R&D program is working to help strategically position the Coast Guard for the future. With ever-increasing level of automation within the maritime transportation system, we're working to stay ahead on cybersecurity challenges and threats. The program is developing improvements to communications capability and domain awareness in the Arctic, and we're collectively excited about the potential improved mission effectiveness made possible by machine learning and artificial intelligence and augmented reality and other emergent technologies. The program is looking at potential Coast Guard uses for autonomous and semi-autonomous systems from the seafloor to space as directed by Congress. Technology changes at a very rapid pace, and the researchers and the engineers and innovators in our RDT&E program are poised to find efficiencies, reduce risk, and explore technologies to optimize mission performance. As the service moves in new directions, research and development will be increasingly vital to provide this knowledge for the Coast Guard. I thank you for the opportunity to testify before today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Appreciate it. I want to bring up a couple systems and a couple examples of things that aren't crazy. They're not seafloor to space. They're not big disruptors, but something like the long-range acoustic device, the LRAD, which I was in San Diego. They have a couple on Coast Guard ships now. I think one or two little cutters have been using them down in Florida. The Navy's had these for over 5 years on every single Navy ship. And for everybody that's watching or listening, it's a speaker, and you're really loud when you talk on it. That's what it is. It's called the long-range acoustic device. You can hail people at like 100 meters away, and they can hear you in the pilot house of the boat when you're yelling at them. I thought it was amazing that the Coast Guard or the people who yell at people to get out of an area don't have that, and the people that shoot at people do have that. Literally every Navy ship has them, and the Coast Guard's still testing as of 2 months ago, after 5 years of Navy use. That's unacceptable. There's no reason to be testing something that the Navy's been using for 5 years on literally every single Navy surface ship that's now on one Coast Guard ship, right? Another example are Predators. You talk about autonomous vehicles, remotely piloted vehicles, unmanned vehicles, artificial intelligence vehicles. You don't have them. Everybody else has been using them but you. You're the smallest force. You have the fewest number of people. You get the least amount of money every year. And you're the slowest to adopt technologies that can leverage your undermanned service in accomplishing your 11 missions. But you're the slowest to adapt those technologies. And that's why we're having this today, having this hearing. So I guess the first question I have is a number of unmanned marine systems are being developed that have the ability to act as a force multiplier. We're talking about any kind of UAV that has a maritime sensor, and that's quite a few now. And you can slap different maritime sensors on any kind of UAV, big or small. Such systems have long endurance and can detect illicit vessel traffic, and some can even act as a visual deterrence. And who knows yet what we can have them do when it comes to turning off motors, doing things like that where they can zap these fast boats if there's not a marine layer or something like that where they can see. So has the Coast Guard explored the use of these systems to improve domain awareness in transit zones? And what role do you foresee in the future? And let's go back to the previous commandant. Admiral Zukum said that he didn't want Predators or UAVs off the coast of San Diego or Florida. He wanted them flying over South and Central America so they could get good keys and cues on the bad guys coming north, not necessarily when the boat's going 70 miles an hour in the ocean off of Orange County, right? So that was what he had talked about and kind of his vision. And I'd like to hear now how that's going to play into what you think and what the new commandant thinks of doing that, or whether he wants to see UAVs off the coast of Orange County.
Thank you. The unmanned aviation systems come in a variety of capabilities and sizes. So the one you're talking about, or most recently we're talking about, were the extremely long range and ultra long endurance UAVs. And thanks to Congress and this subcommittee, we received money in fiscal year 17 to actually explore that and actually do a demonstration of that. We've worked with the folks at DHS, in particular the PEO for UAV systems at DHS, and Customs and Border Patrol as well. And we've been working together for the last year or so to put that program into place. And I'm excited to announce that we actually issued the request for proposals last week to actually get that demonstration in place to see how that technology can be used in the Coast Guard for long range. In the kind of the middle range area, we've made great strides on a small UAS that we can deploy on our ships. So we executed a kind of a prototype system over the last several years with Coast Guard Cutter Stratton. So we deployed a UAS on board for 3 or 4 deployments. And that UAS has provided great capabilities, and our crews love them. They provide maritime domain awareness on site.
What is it? What UAS system? Or what UAS?
It's the In-Situ Scan Eagle, sir.
Scan Eagle.
Yep. So that is a catapult-launched asset that we launch off the flight deck. We launch it up in the air. It provides intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities. We've had to develop policy to make that happen, but it has been working phenomenally. It has contributed to drug busts in theater, to a number of these things, and the crew loves it. And I'm excited to announce that probably in about 2 weeks, we'll be issuing, we'll actually be awarding a contract to put that capability on the next, on the 8 NSCs for the next 5 to 8 years. And that's technology that our fleet loves, and they're going to be really excited to get that deployed. Finally, in kind of the short range, kind of a hand-launched area, our Assistant Commandant for Capabilities has authorized our small boat field units to go out and procure some of the smaller UASs to test them, find out what sort of utility they have in the field, and then we'll use those lessons learned to go out and create our policy and then go after a kind of a standard asset.
The last thing I would recommend, you've had Special Forces, Army and Navy and Marine Corps, and the Navy just in general on small boats launching UASs for a decade now, okay? For about 10 years. So they're about 10 years ahead of you. The non-sea service, right, services are already ahead of you, including the Army and Marine Corps, semi-sea service. So I think you got some catching up to do. Can you tell me really quick the difference between launching a unmanned vehicle off of a Navy ship compared to launching an unmanned vehicle off of a Coast Guard ship? The way that, do the ships float differently, or how do they, what's the difference?
So the primary difference between the way we use our ship launch UASs and probably the Navy is we have slightly different mission sets. And so we need our assets to provide ISR for long periods of time. So we're looking for assets that can be up for 12 or more hours off the ship to kind of increase our awareness of what's going on around the actual ship itself, increases our visibility. We can have to contend with weather. We typically find ourselves going.
But wait, the question is, what are the differences? So the Navy contends with weather. They contend with different ship sizes and different things too. So what are when you're in the ocean and a Navy ship's in the ocean, it's the same size ship. What's the difference between them being able to launch UAS and having been doing so for years in the Coast Guard? Meaning, what's the technical difference of launching a UAS off a Coast Guard ship in the same ocean that a Navy ship's sitting? And they're the same size ships. They're in the same ocean. What's the difference?
There are no technical differences between the two assets.
Should there be a Navy Coast Guard Joint Program Office for unmanned systems as well, like the Icebreaker? We can get everybody on the same page, because the Navy has more money, as we all know, more people, more testing, the ability to do this, because they've been doing it for longer without having to, right, they're not jumping through hoops anymore. I mean, it's a great system to probably copy in your own way, is what I'm saying.
As you know, that our integrated program with the Navy and the Icebreakers has been a phenomenal endeavor so far. We've made great progress. I don't know that we need that for the UAS, because we've actually made phenomenal progress on this endeavor as it is so far. We're on the cusp of actually deploying that here on all the NSCs. So I don't know we need help at this point in time. Maybe it might have been helpful if we did it years back, but I think we're in a good place, sir.
But again, you're talking about Scan Eagle, which is extremely old technology with hopefully new sensors on it, but this isn't groundbreaking, right? It's a little bit late to the game, but better late than never.
Well, I don't know what system we'll actually be deploying, because we haven't awarded that contract yet. The prototype was Scan Eagle. We have not identified any major issues with Scan Eagle. That UAS has done phenomenal for us, and we're really excited about awarding the contract and getting this permanently on the ships.
Thank you, Admiral. I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Garamendi.
The chairman is working on a line of questioning that I think is really important here, and that is the adoption of new techniques and technology. And apparently the Coast Guard, in its adoption process, is slow to adopt. And the questions that I would like to get to really are the organizational structures that would retard the adoption of new technologies, new techniques, equipment, and so forth. Let's start with the budget for the Development, Testing, and Evaluation Program. I think you're requesting like $17.2 million, which is 47% less. Why? And if this particular budget or line item is critical in the adoption of new techniques, technologies, and equipment, why the reduction? Or maybe this isn't where the problem lies. Could we just go into that for a few moments?
Our R&D budget has been fairly consistent over the years. I'm wondering if you're talking about the 47% because of the $18 million plus up for the long-range UAS. We've been operating around $18 million for the last several years for the R&D budget, and that gets us where we need to go. It would obviously be better if we had more, but we find ways of getting around that by leveraging the other entities out there who have done some of this work. One of the things we're trying to prevent ourselves doing is recreating the wheel, duplicating efforts done by others. And so one of the things we do is we partner with the national laboratories, the Naval Research Lab. We just recently got into an agreement with the Air Force, first of its kind, to leverage some of the stuff they're working with, working with science and technology. So we do these things to kind of augment that and make up for,
Well, all well and good. The notion of working with other agencies and using their knowledge and testing, excellent. How then does that get into the operations of the Coast Guard? How do you transition that information? I'm looking at the organizational structure. There's something here that isn't working smoothly. Technologies are readily available, techniques, but the Coast Guard isn't adopting them. As the chairman was driving into this, what is it in this organizational structure that is retarding the integration of these new systems into the Coast Guard's daily operations? If it's not this RDT&E, apparently that's not important, and you're able to make up for the less money by utilizing other agencies. Then that information, that knowledge from other agencies has to find its way into the Coast Guard. How does it get there? How is it acquired?
There are a number of ways we do this. One of the things we've tried to do recently is we're trying to spur more innovation within the service. So we've stood up an innovation council, which has senior leaders here at headquarters that are engaged in RDT&E efforts to provide guidance and oversight. We have created a crowdsourcing platform that has gotten great use over the last year or so, where we basically allow folks at all levels in the organization, from military, civilian, young new sailors, all the way up to senior officers, can all provide input on various topics that we put in the crowdsourcing platform. That allows us to get new ideas to go after. The second thing we do is we use that information to create a portfolio of things we believe are the best return on investment for the Coast Guard. Since I arrived in CG9 last spring, one of the things I've asked the Research and Development Center to do is place a greater emphasis on the actual transition of the research and development efforts into products that the operational Coast Guard can use. And so now our folks up there are, when they do this, they also look at, okay, what's the next step in the process? How do we go about putting this into the operational user's hands in the Coast Guard?
Can you develop and deliver to the committee a portfolio, the word you used, of ideas, products, techniques, technologies that are currently being looked at by your organization? Something is amiss here. The adoption and the openness to new ideas. Like, how does an individual from, I don't know, say Scripps, who has developed a great sensing device that could be used on one of your ships, get to your office so that you can acquire that knowledge, that technique? In other words, is your door open?
Yes, sir. The door is definitely open. And we are excited about opportunities to do this sort of thing.
There's a whole series of questions. I can go on for some time here about this. We sense that there is a slowness, a reticence within the Coast Guard to adopt new techniques, new technologies, new equipment. The chairman gave, I don't know, 3 different examples a moment ago. What is it about the organization that is retarding the acquisition of these new systems? Just for example, we know that the offshore patrol cutters are someday going to get out there. In the meantime, we have ancient equipment that is not terribly reliable. What are we doing in the intervening period to use these new systems to understand the domain, the maritime domain? Are you open to that?
We are open to that.
And what are you doing in your openness?
Well, part of it is we need to know that it exists. And that's one of the key roles our Research and Development Center plays, is getting out there and finding out what sort of technology exists. So the folks at the R&D Center are constantly on the prowl. They are out there visiting folks. They are doing research online. They're attending conventions. They're having meetings with the technology centers, things of that nature. So we're aware of those capabilities. The next step after you've been made aware of this, you got to prioritize it and make sure that you're using your resources for those things that bring the best value to the operator out in the field. We have a process for that, and that process starts usually at the end of the summer. We get input from the field, and then we later in the winter we actually bring people together. Usually we get an external look, someone from Naval Research Lab, S&T, the chief scientist for DHS. We'll bring all these senior folks into the room, and we'll go through all these projects in detail to determine which ones make the most sense for the Coast Guard to go after. And then we put that portfolio together, and then that is the marching orders for the R&D Center, and they go out and they go after this.
Your title is Commandant for Acquisition and Chief Acquisition Officer. And I know this committee puts a lot of pressure on you with things like icebreakers and other major pieces of equipment. I think we're going to put, well, we're putting more pressure on you about these other systems, not the big ones, but all of the systems that make the icebreaker more effective, more efficient. The offshore patrol cutters, more effective, more efficient. And these are not the big flashy things, but these are UASs, other devices that expand the ability of the Coast Guard to carry out its many, many tasks. And so just since you have such broad shoulders, in addition to the major acquisitions and the recapitalizations that are underway, these other things, my question really goes, and my issue really goes to the organizational structure that provides the open door for these systems to be brought to the Coast Guard and then implemented along the way. So I'm going to drive at that. Right now, I think I've taken much more time than I would otherwise have available. But the specific question, how could the Coast Guard improve its interactions with the new technology, the blue technology industries and firms sufficient to keep the Coast Guard abreast of the latest development and innovations? So this is an organizational question for which I'll be driving. I suspect the committee will drive to. So thank you very much for that. Yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Mr. Graves from Louisiana is recognized.
Admiral, thank you for being here. I want to start out with something that's perhaps not in your column, but affects the Coast Guard nonetheless. We recently had a boating accident off the coast of Louisiana where 3 folks were out there, and I've been on the phone with numerous Coast Guard men and women over the past several days, including Commander sitting behind you. And I do want to give a big shout out to the Coast Guard for their efforts on that search and rescue, that SAR mission. I know you had a lot of assets out there. I know you were working very closely with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office. Certainly all lives are important. One of the gentlemen that was lost really had a transformational effect. And my hometown of Baton Rouge started a church after the Billy Graham Crusade and saved a lot of lives in many, many ways. And so I just want to thank all the men and women for the Coast Guard for their efforts overnight and countless hours in airplanes, helicopters, and boats assisting in that SAR mission. Very, very important, so thank you. Changing gears a little bit, can you talk a little bit, your testimony makes reference to some of the research and development or perhaps advances that you've made in oil spill technology. You talk specifically about in situ burns at your facility in Alabama. Can you talk about other advancements that the Coast Guard is involved in, but perhaps also collaboration with industry in the aftermath of Deepwater Horizon?
First, thank you for recognizing the efforts of the Coast Guard. The folks that go out there and do the rescues, they don't do it for the recognition, but they do appreciate the fact that people notice. They're just doing what they're trying to do, and we appreciate the support. And we appreciate the support of the committee as well. The Joint Maritime Test Facility down in Alabama is a great national asset. We partner with BSEE and Department of Energy and others to make best use of that. Technology is changing all the time, and as we look at things like response to oil spills, we can use that facility to try different techniques to mitigate the oil spill. So that facility is up and running, and we get great support on that, and we get a lot of collaboration with industry to make that happen. We take our oil spill responsibilities very serious. And one of the things we've recently done, I think the committee will be happy to know, is we've looked at things like, how do you recover oil that is sinking in the water column? How do you detect it and go after it? And so we actually just completed a test recently here in that endeavor, looking at how do you best recover that? And so we've got some great data from that. We're going to use that data to figure out what's the next step in that endeavor to improve our ability to mitigate oil spills.
Well, first, I just want to ask if y'all could, on the record or perhaps before the record, or perhaps coming back and giving us a briefing, updates on some of the efforts by private industry to improve safety techniques, because certainly you need to be working in collaboration with them. I know that they have made substantial progress in new safety techniques and collection devices and other things, and I think it's important that the Coast Guard and the industry are working very closely together. Again, I've been briefed on a lot of the technology they have developed, and it really is impressive. In regard to the oil sinking, the only time I've really seen that happen is in the case of Deepwater Horizon, when y'all hit it with the dispersant below the surface. Otherwise, I think the oil comes up. The only other instance is when it binds with the fine silts and sands and therefore changing the weight of it. But I think there are a lot of lessons learned from Deepwater Horizon that can be applied if there, and we all hope there isn't, if there is another oil spill disaster like that. But again, I would like to follow up with you on some of those technologies. Next, Arctic strategy. We sent a letter last month to the Commandant and to the CNO regarding a joint Arctic strategy. I think a number of us are very concerned, and I think I can speak for everyone up on this panel. All of us are very concerned about the apparent separate or siloed Arctic strategy approaches by the Navy and the Coast Guard. Obviously, both of you are critical in that region. We've seen the advances of Russia, China, and other countries. We've discussed ad nauseum in this committee about the fact that the United States is far behind other Arctic nations in terms of capabilities, icebreaking, and others. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of a joint strategy, what you all are doing to have a joint strategy with the Navy?
As you've indicated, I think, and we would recognize that working together with the Navy is an important part of the Arctic strategy, and I think we would welcome that, and we would go after that. I don't have the details because that's more of an operational concern, so I'd really need to get back to you on that one, sir. I wish I could answer that.
Admiral, I think it's very important that we have a joint strategy. You all work seamlessly with the Navy in other parts of the world. You do a great job. You have a common mission. Your platforms are compatible. I think that all of us feel very strongly that having a similar relationship with the Navy in the Arctic is important. Last question. Could you talk a little bit about, I think this is in your wheelhouse, the role of dynamic positioning autonomous vehicles and others in the Arctic, and how perhaps advances are in regard to Arctic platforms, how those two issues come into play there?
Sorry. Autonomous systems are a very important part of the future in the Arctic. We need to make sure that vessels navigating in the Arctic regions and those that are taking station up there for resources, oil exploration, that sort of thing, are safe and can operate up there with basically respond to all the risks and such. So we welcome the opportunity to work with industry to further explore those things. You talked a little bit about the Deepwater Horizon and some of the folks down in your area that have developed some interesting lessons learned and some technologies. We welcome the opportunity to work with those folks to take advantage of those technologies. Really what it comes down to, sir, is if we're aware of something that goes on, we're interested in trying to take advantage of it and leverage it for the purposes of maritime safety.
I just want to clarify that I'm talking about for purposes of the Coast Guard's assets, the role that dynamic positioning and autonomous and Coast Guard assets. But I know I'm over time. Let me yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized. Plaskett.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being here and providing this testimony and what I think is really important technology that you're working on. I wanted to ask you questions that were more related, not so much to the research, but the application of the technology in different areas. And the first one is with regard to some of your duties and your mandate in the Caribbean related to illegal drug trafficking. There's a tremendous flow of drugs and weapons between the U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the area of Puerto Rico. On all sides, all of these islands are completely surrounded by water, and you all stand in many instances as a first line of defense for us in the flow of those drugs and weapons from the Virgin Islands into the mainland. And what I was wondering is, some of the technology that you've spoken about today and is in your written testimony, what is the application of those technologies in that area, and how might it be used to further stem the flow of those illegal drugs and weapons?
So some of the technologies that can be used up there include biometrics and improving our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities through the use of UASs. In particular, the biometrics, we've employed that starting with our 110-foot patrol boats a number of years back, and we've actually taken that program and expanded it to other assets such as the fast response cutters. Really, our key is to identify those threats before they make landfall, push our borders out. And so our use of things like a UAS and having that ability to identify those threats far out is probably the first key.
And how does the technology do that? Is that through, how do you improve the maritime domain awareness to be able to do that? Since there's no way you could have sufficient number of actual vessels in the waters to be able to protect the islands.
No, thank you. We work with other agencies in terms of law enforcement. So we work with DOD in employing some of their ISR capabilities. We work with the FBI and other organizations, and we share information. So the information that we get from our assets, we feed that common operational picture for the other agencies, and we extract information from that as well, so we can do a better job at being at the right place at the right time to engage with the trafficking.
Okay. I guess I was just trying to drill down into, was there any specific technologies that would be more helpful or that you have been testing to be able to utilize in this area? But I understand your joint work with HIDA in particular and DEA and others is really a first line of defense is what you're saying, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. One of the other things that is a concern to me, particularly the announcement, for many years we had an oil refinery in the Virgin Islands, and it's my understanding that our governor is closing the deal on that reopening. Because the natural resources of the island are so particularly important to us, I'm very concerned, and there's discussions of an underwater pipeline to be able to keep the vessels further offshore and pipe them into for refining. Can you tell me, and I always have a concern about maritime accidents as oil spills or grounding, the proposed detrimental impact. Is the Coast Guard pursuing any new technologies to respond to oil spills or other maritime disasters which occur not just in the Caribbean, but on the Gulf, in California, and other areas as well?
Sorry. The R&D Center has a lot of different projects that we work on, and we get $500,000 a year coming out of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. We put that money to good use, trying to find ways to mitigate accidents that have already occurred and then prevent accidents from occurring as well. Our prevention folks, the community in the Coast Guard that tries to prevent these sorts of things, works hard to train their people to make sure they know how to go about identifying problems before they occur. And then we try to share information we get, and we hold people accountable when they don't do what they're supposed to do to keep things safe.
Is this the use of crowdsourcing that you were talking about in other areas that you've utilized? Is this also utilized in oil spills or other natural disasters?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And from that crowdsourcing, is there partnerships that you have with private sector technology companies that might be utilized for more rapid response or mitigation of the damages from some of these?
Yeah, there are lots of opportunities there. The cooperative research and development agreements are one method we use to get with industry, to form partnerships. We provide an opportunity for them to get on the Coast Guard assets and test things, and then we have the opportunity to learn more about it and figure out how to adapt that for use in the Coast Guard.
Do you find that is really helpful, having those partnerships with those technology companies or others? Is that working well, not just in terms of the technology and its application, but as Ranking Member Garamendi said, then being able to adapt to the culture of the Coast Guard as well?
Yes, these credits have been very, very beneficial to us. It's a great relationship we have with our partners, and we're looking for ways to create more.
Okay, thank you. No further questions at this time. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. I think to Mr. Graves' questions too, really quick. You are the Chief Acquisition Officer of the Coast Guard. So when he talks about the operation, I understand you're not the operational guy for the Coast Guard, but you're going to be the one answering and hearing all the operational needs when they ask you to then acquire a piece of gear to meet those needs. You are, so you know what they're going, meaning you have the answer to his question, whether you know it or not, because you're hearing what they want to acquire, and you will hear, because that's what your job is. So Mr. Graves, just to your point, the Admiral is the Chief Acquisition Officer for the Coast Guard. So he's not the operational requirements guy for the Polar Icebreaker, but he's going to be getting all the requests for all the gear that will fulfill the operational requirement needs. So you are the right guy to talk to. And I think you will have those answers going forward on what the Joint Program Office is looking for to be able to fulfill all needs. And I just hope that we make that bigger. Because I think you got my point earlier. There's no difference launching a UAS from a Coast Guard vessel and a Navy vessel. There's no difference. There's no difference shooting off of a Coast Guard vessel and shooting off of a naval vessel. There's no difference launching a helicopter off a Coast Guard vessel and a naval vessel, as long as they're the same size vessels. There is no difference. Still in the ocean, on a ship, and it's the same thing. So why did it take 5 years to get a loudspeaker on Coast Guard ships? It's a mounting issue. I know you can't mount it where the guns are and stuff. Get it, but it took 5 years to get a speaker, which is one of the Coast Guard's core competencies, is to keep people out of certain areas where you yell at people. It's not a Navy core competency, but it took 5 years for something that I was so surprised that the Coast Guard didn't have these LRADs on the ships. It blew my mind, and that the Navy did. It should have been vice versa. But just hope that you look at not necessarily joint program offices, but looking at what the Navy's doing and not recreating the wheel, not doing RDT&E, because you don't need to. They've already done it. And if we can change the rules, or we can change the law so you can piggyback on the Navy more, so you don't have to go through steps A through D, you can just jump to E, that'd be great. And I think that's what we're kind of pushing for here. So, Admiral, thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and thank you for your testimony and service.
It's an honor to be here.
And we're going to move to the second panel. And while everybody's moving around, I'll introduce. Actually, we can wait. Take your time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We will now move to the second panel. We'll hear from Dr. Eric, and help me on the names, Terrell, easy enough. Director of the Coastal Observing Research and Development Center at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. That's a great place. Go there all the time, just surf back in the old days. Mr. Michael Jones, President of the Maritime Alliance. Mr. Chris Coyle, member of the International Ocean Science and Technology Industry Association. Mr. Thomas Chance, Chief Executive Officer of the Autonomous Surface Vehicles. Dr. Tuba Ozkan Haller, all right, Professor and Associate Dean at the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State University, and Rear Admiral Jonathan White, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. Dr. Terrell, we realize too you have to leave at 11:45, so just feel free to hop up and roll when you got to go. We now recognize you to give your statement.
All right, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and discuss new maritime technologies. As I was introduced, my name is Eric Terrell, and I'm the director of the Coastal Observing R&D Center at Scripps in San Diego, and I have 25 years experience as an oceanographer, leading basic and applied research programs around the globe. In the interest of brevity, I shall forego Scripps' very long history of supporting national defense objectives, but that legacy is captured in my written testimony. So in my testimony, I'll address 3 points: the merits of the Coast Guard developing partnerships with organizations and agencies that specialize in conducting maritime RDT&E, using existing maritime technologies tailored to the Coast Guard mission, and exploitation of data and products from existing networks to enhance Coast Guard mission readiness. In 2002, a Joint Harbor Operations Center, the one that was referred to in your introductory remarks, Chairman, was developed after the events of 9/11, and in this center, dispatchers work side by side across a whole range of agencies, including National Guard, Customs, ICE, and various other personnel. And the Jayhawk is an analog for the type of interagency partnering that will be required if there is an expectation to efficiently field modern blue technologies with the Coast Guard. In the history of Scripps, my organization has maintained a strong emphasis on the development, testing, and evaluation of maritime platforms and sensors for the purposes of persistent ocean sampling. And in many cases, these capabilities are directly relevant to the men and women who provide maritime security to our nation. UUVs, or underwater vehicles, continue to develop as a frontier technology for subsurface exploration and sensing advances. These vehicles, with appropriate sensors, payloads, can assist the Coast Guard in detecting and tracking oil spills of unknown origin, finding sunken wrecks, and assess their potential to leak bunker oil, mapping bathymetry hazards and marine habitats, and detecting IUU or illegal fishing activities. Unmanned surface vessels are maturing as well as another maritime platform for consideration to serve the maritime security mission. And contrary to underwater vehicles, their ever-present surface expression provides an always-on communication, ISR, and navigation capabilities with GPS. In my experience with unmanned surface craft, you referred to your trip up to Silicon Valley and see debris 6 years ago. That debris has now matured to a commercially available platform through a company called Liquid Robotics. We've had a wide range of successes and a range of operating environments with that platform. And applicability to the Coast Guard includes ship traffic monitoring, fisheries protection, ocean sea state characterization, and monitoring of currents in support of oil spill trajectory analysis, communication gateways between surface craft and ship routing. Unmanned aerial systems are another tool that could be transitioned. A lot of discussion earlier this morning on that. An emergent technology of interest in that regime is the hybrid UAS that allows for vertical and takeoff from a fixed location, but transit with a fixed wing similar to an Osprey. So now you have not the loadout that you might have with a catapult type system of the ScanEagle. These capabilities are only now in development for use from ships operating on the high seas. Scripps recommends partnering within the Department of Defense that are already making investments in developing maritime surveillance tech systems. Office of Naval Research is an example of an Echelon 1 command which invests in RDT&E to routinely conduct small-scale demonstrations for developing and testing new concepts of operations and technologies, and leverages the expertise in testing of their program managers in operating efficient RDT&E programs. Science and technology and a spiral development with an emphasis on at-sea testing allows the capability to incrementally evolve and improve with lower risk. Successful demonstrations can be transitioned to support operations, while unsuccessful demonstrations provide valuable lessons learned before you field it to a whole fleet. Along the U.S. coast, there's a wide network of 168 high-frequency radars sponsored by NOAA through MOUs. They provide this information to the Coast Guard for missions such as oil spill and response and search and rescue and operations. This is an operational network. However, the opportunity remains elusive to continue to exploit that system because it's only funded at the 50% level at which it was originally earmarked or identified in a national plan to get that radar network in operation. So in closing, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify on the role of marine technologies and provide suggestions for U.S. to leverage ongoing investments and use new maritime technologies to improve maritime mission performance and efficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terrell. Mr. Jones, great to see you out here. You're recognized.
Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity. I'm president of the Maritime Alliance. We're a nonprofit industry association founded in 2007 and based in San Diego. We're a leading voice for blue tech nationally and internationally. We are a multi-year strategic partner with the U.S. Department of Commerce and received a grant to organize the first ever U.S. Maritime Technology Export Initiative. In 2017, we helped form the Blue Tech Cluster Alliance, the first international coalition of blue tech clusters. The blue economy is enormous and growing. It is blue tech that allows us to understand ocean problems, and blue tech is critical to develop solutions to these problems. And blue tech companies are providing the innovative tools and services that permit emerging ocean industries to develop. The Maritime Alliance has over 90 members from across the U.S. and internationally. In conjunction with our international cluster partners, we have access to thousands of companies. Following are some maritime issues that the Maritime Alliance Blue Tech member companies are addressing that may be of interest to the Coast Guard. First, in autonomy software and autonomous vessels. Multiple TMA member companies are involved in autonomy in the air, on and under the water. As examples, Boston-based Sea Machines Robotics recently announced a contract with Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, to trial the world's first artificial intelligence-powered situational awareness system aboard a container ship. And San Diego-based Planck Aerosystems drone intelligence improves real-time situational awareness via autonomous takeoff and landing for moving vessels at sea. Second, under big data, enormous amounts of ocean data is being collected. Redlands, California-based Esri, the world's leading GIS software mapping company, is helping unlock the potential of data to improve operational and business results. And San Diego-based XST provides big data consulting services, including high-definition, hyperlocal weather prediction. Third, in cybersecurity, we know good cyber hygiene, training, and innovation technologies and services are needed to protect the logistics chain. Philadelphia-based Nostec helped mitigate cybersecurity risks from sea to shore. Fourth, in ocean observation, the Integrated Ocean Observing System, IOOS, is the national regional partnership focused on ocean observation and enjoys wide industry support. TMA was co-author of the Ocean Enterprise, the first ever national scale assessment of the value of ocean observation, published in February 2016, that identified over 400 U.S. companies in 36 states, representing over $7 billion in revenue. Fifth, in pollution mitigation, San Diego-based Earthwise Sorbents is pioneering high-performance algae-based, not petroleum, but algae-based sorbents to clean up oil and chemical spills on land and in water. Seattle-based Marine Construction Technologies has patented an innovative pile design that reduces noise pollution from impact pile driving by 80 to 90%. Sixth, port and maritime efficiency and security. Durham, North Carolina-based Port Call and San Ramon, California-based Ocean Manager have developed maritime tech software to help port and ship owners to be more efficient. Richmond, California-based WAM-V produces a watercraft using patented suspension technology to radically improve seagoing capabilities. And seventh, in predictive analytics, Seattle-based IO Currents gathers real-time data on important assets on commercial vessels into a central database on board to prevent automated analysis with in-the-cloud availability and backup. This allows operators to predict and preemptively resolve likely equipment failures. So following are some ideas for the subcommittee to consider to enhance the Coast Guard's ability to identify, test, and incorporate blue tech. Increase travel funding to attend blue tech-oriented events. increase funding to evaluate blue tech products and services, enhance the on-ramp to make it easier to identify innovative technology and services, enhance the Innovation Council with regional meetings alongside blue tech events, make regional tech scouting part of someone's role, establish a secondary innovation center on the U.S. West Coast, promote blue tech collaboration with other U.S. government agencies in the marine domain, promote blue tech collaboration in transfer to and from other countries' forces. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We are grateful to the members of the subcommittee for focusing on blue tech. Maritime Alliance stands ready to be a resource to this committee. I request that the entirety of my written testimony be entered into the record of this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to sing Michael's praises. No one's done what he's done yet, creating a blue tech consortium that someone can go to as a single point. They have this for everybody else, but no one thought to do it on the water. And it's pretty amazing, and a lot of money, and it gives the Coast Guard and the Navy and other organizations a single point to go to say, hey, what's out there? But thank you for all that you're doing. Mr. Chance, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you very much. To help us stay on schedule, I will summarize my written testimony. Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and distinguished members of the committee, I am honored to testify today regarding the use of new maritime technologies to improve the efficiency and mission performance of the U.S. Coast Guard. As CEO of ASV Global, the world's largest and most experienced unmanned surface vehicle company, I can speak as to where unmanned vessel technology is today and where it's going. However, before I do so, let me commend the work of the U.S. Coast Guard and this subcommittee for its long history of outstanding service. The Coast Guard is saving lives, fighting crime, and defending our country on a daily basis, and the citizens of this country should never take that for granted. Unmanned surface vehicles, or USVs, are simply unmanned boats. Our company alone has delivered more than 100 USVs to military and commercial users across the globe. These USVs have ranged up to 40 feet in length, up to 1,000 horsepower, and endurance in excess of 30 days. However, we currently have several inquiries, both commercial and military, for unmanned vessels in the 80-foot to 200-foot range with endurance up to 3 months. Leidos Corporation recently built a 132-foot USV, while the Norwegians and the Chinese are starting to build USVs up to 260 feet in length. In addition to USVs that cannot accommodate personnel, industry has built dozens of optionally unmanned vessels. Optionally unmanned allows the asset to be deployed with a full crew on board, a reduced crew, or no crew at all. Finally, ASV Global has upgraded several existing vessels to optionally unmanned. By upgrading to optionally unmanned, existing assets can experience the progression to unmanned without losing existing capabilities. Just as driverless cars have a steering wheel and a driver's seat, the current pragmatic approach to driverless vessels is to allow them to drive autonomously while remotely supervising their operation over a radio or satellite telemetry link. At the same time, COLREG-compliant collision avoidance software continues to mature so that remote supervision can eventually be phased out. Economics is the driving force towards the use of unmanned vessels. When you go from manned to unmanned ships, you don't need a galley and a mess. You don't need bunk rooms, hallways, heads, washing machines, dishwashers, freezers, stairways, workshops, a meeting room, or a large bridge. In a sense, an unmanned vessel is a hull with diesel tanks, engines, and a rack of computers and sensors. While I don't want to trivialize what is necessary for unmanned vessel operations, the capital cost of an unmanned vessel can be far less than that of its manned equivalent. In addition to reduced capital costs, unmanned vessels can offer reduced daily operating costs as vessel personnel are condensed to those remotely supervising operations and those maintaining unmanned vessels while at port. Finally, CONOPS, such as offshore stationing, can substantially reduce operating costs. USVs can offer persistent maritime domain awareness where unmanned or optionally unmanned vessels, large or small, can remain on station for weeks at a time while providing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, as well as interception and, to a degree, interdiction. Coast Guard personnel at land-based command centers can dispatch pre-deployed unmanned vessels to intercept and assess. Non-lethal weapons, such as prop net entanglement systems, can be used by USVs to stop suspect vessels until manned Coast Guard vessels can arrive and apprehend. Offshore stationed USVs can be used for drug interdiction, illegal fishing interdiction, border protection, collision investigations, search and rescue, pollution incident investigations, and investigation of the numerous reported suspect vessels in distress. The Coast Guard vessels of all sizes are candidates for upgrades with collision avoidance bridge age to mitigate maritime collisions. Future shipbuild programs should certainly consider fully unmanned, partially unmanned, and optionally unmanned ships. These are just a few of the many applications of unmanned surface vessel technology that can be considered by the U.S. Coast Guard. While additional appropriations are necessary for the Coast Guard to capitalize on unmanned technology, the economic and strategic advantages are likely to be overwhelmingly positive, as they are with other unmanned technologies in the military and commercial sectors. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chance. Mr. Coyle, you're recognized for your statement.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Coyle. I want to thank the chairman, ranking member, and distinguished committee for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today about blue technologies, an exciting field. Today I'm representing IOSHA, the International Ocean Science and Technology Industry Association, which represents business and organizations that provide technology and services for sectors that sustainably and commercially utilize the oceans. As an example of this hearing, IOSHA provides a unified public policy voice for those in the industry space. During the day, I work for Exocetus Autonomous Systems, a company that designs, manufactures, and services deep-sea robots, autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, in business development and strategic partnerships. I also lead the company's data and analytics initiative for the company's X-Prize entry. In fact, Exocetus was named a semifinalist in the Shell Ocean Discovery X-Prize for mapping the ocean floor. We were only one of 19 teams selected from around the world out of 1,400 entrants, so we're extremely proud of this Moonshot Award. In addition, Exocetus is a semifinalist in NOAA's prize for detecting chemical and biological signals underwater. Our oceans cover 70% of the planet, yet only 10% of the ocean floor has been mapped. We know more about the surface of the moon than we know about what lies below the surface of our waters. How is that possible? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson have spent billions of dollars of their own wealth and raised billions more from Silicon Valley investors. It's sexy and exciting, yet they've re-energized the planet's interest in outer space, intergalactic travel, and potential colonization for another planet, but is entirely misguided. The final frontier to be discovered is our oceans. The next space race is our oceans. Our planet depends on the access to healthy and plentiful oceans. Blue tech should be the focus, not space. As population growth climbs, as migration to concentrated coastal areas continues, as farmlands around the world shrink, as more and more people become dependent on fish protein, as seas play a more Herculean role in carbon capture, ocean needs to be today's focus for emerging technology, investments, and U.S. government attention. And so blue technology is a critical technology to encourage as our children grow into adults and take on leadership roles. This past week, I came across an article entitled, "Can the U.S. Navy Brave the Waves of Autonomous Warfare?" I'll hand the article to your staff in case you'd like to include that in the record today. The article's thesis is that AUVs offer greater efficiency, mission range, and lower cost of capital than other more traditional naval means. AUVs will prove to be cheaper to operate, but fewer seamen in harm's way, and therefore assume greater levels of risk. AUVs are more expendable and can augment a fleet to do search and reconnaissance. In July, DARPA contracted Base Systems to build small AUVs to detect enemy subs. Today, AUVs are working on sea sensing and mine countermeasure tasks. By 2025, the Navy's AUVs will support undersea warfare by going into denied waters that are either too deep or too shallow for manned platforms. AUVs will continue to provide greater benefit to the U.S. Coast Guard for port and water security, maintaining aids in navigation, marine environmental protection, oil spill and protection and response, marine pollution laws, fisheries, ocean shipping lanes, and in support of the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2017. My company, Exacetus, is a quintessential example of a sound U.S. government collaboration. Exacetus was started with a $15 million federal grant to develop its buoyancy engine, resulting in 3 patents in the engine design and 1 on the retrieval system. Today, we are proud to say the Navy presently is using our AUVs. To me, the most exciting thing about AUVs are the sensors and the integration of all the emerging technologies such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain to process the big data and analytics that will provide essential information and intelligence for our national security, coastal erosion, port security, shipping lanes, laying fiber optic cable for communication, internet, and media companies, and meteorological disturbances, to name just a few. The future for blue technology is bright. The million-dollar question is, are we going to seize this amazing opportunity and support and invest in brand new industries that will create high-paying jobs for the future, or are we going to continue to kick the can down the street? If we don't, the Chinese and the Russians will. I'm convinced that the potential for the blue economy and blue tech will be the next biggest revolution that we have seen in decades. The best way to predict the future is create it. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Coyle. Dr. Oskenholler, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today on blue technologies developed within academic settings and how they can support the Coast Guard's mission. I am a professor at Oregon State University, and I conduct research on the prediction and forecasting of ocean conditions. My work also explores ways to present forecast results to make them most usable for various stakeholders, including bar pilots, the fishing community, the National Weather Service, and the Coast Guard. My testimony today will focus on the potential for wave forecasting systems and other forecasting innovations to help advance operational capabilities of the Coast Guard, including safe navigation and identification of illegal activities at sea. The development and refinement of these forecasting tools heavily relies on observations of the ocean, both from long-term observing platforms as well as from innovative autonomous platforms that you have already heard about this morning. Today, I will stress that strategic investments are required in technology development and in continuing education activities to ensure the effective utilization of these technologies to meet the mission objectives of the Coast Guard. First, ocean wave and current forecasts are analytical tools that can help stakeholders understand and predict ocean conditions. Recent advances in predictive models allow for detailed and high-resolution forecasts of ocean conditions. Forecasts in the open ocean can be used during search and rescue operations to narrow down the geographical area of interest. Forecasts near navigational inlets are a critical capability at many challenging inlets where transit through the river mouth and over the river bar can be treacherous. The mouth of the Columbia River, often colloquially referred to as the graveyard of the Pacific, is one such example. $24 billion of cargo moves through the Columbia River system annually. The Coast Guard makes decisions about bar closures that halt vessel traffic, and the cost of a bar closure to the local economy is significant. One of the groups that play a role in bar closure decisions involve the Columbia River bar pilots. They require accurate forecasts 10 hours in advance because of the time required by a tanker released from the upriver port to reach the river mouth. Once there, most of these tankers are too big to turn around, so the hazard of making a wrong decision can mean a disaster on the bar. For the last 5 years, the Columbia River bar pilots have been utilizing our wave forecasts to inform their decision-making on navigational planning. We have worked extensively and iteratively with the bar pilots to create an interface that meets their needs and maximizes their ability to use the results. They now use forecasts for the computation of under-keel clearance values, as well as for recommendations regarding the closure of the bar, along with, perhaps more critically, the timing of the reopening of the bar. Additionally, predictive forecasting capabilities also now show promise for identifying illegal activities at sea. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated activities at sea can be challenging to assess and predict. The key challenge is that vessels committing IUU activities turn off their GPS transponders and therefore go dark. New solutions for predicting IUU activity using mathematical models based on complex systems theories are currently emerging, and these methods exploit the fact that vessel traffic responds to the presence and absence of other vessels in the area, whether they are visible to us or dark. So observing the behavior of the visible fleet carries clues about the movement of the dark fleet. While this research is still in very early stages, further development of these methods could aid in more efficient and effective patrol strategies. Finally, there is rapid advancement in research and technology innovation, but strategic investment in technology development by the user, in this case the Coast Guard, is critical to assure that any technology of interest is designed to meet their specific capability objectives. Our experience with wave forecasting products suggests that the needs of the barb pilots are quite different from the needs of the tuna fishing industry, for instance. Hence, close engagement is needed during the development phase of the products, and coordinated education is essential to assure the effective utilization of blue technologies by Coast Guard personnel. In closing, research and innovation in the field of ocean wave and current forecasting is proving to be increasingly significant in its potential to be translated into technology and information systems for the Coast Guard. I thank the subcommittee for your efforts to consider the role of technology, innovation, and applications for efficiently and effectively advancing critical Coast Guard capabilities, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony. Admiral White, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Hunter and Ranking Member Garamendi and honored members of the subcommittee. During my 32-year career in the Navy, culminating in my assignment as oceanographer and navigator of the Navy, I worked with the Coast Guard at sea and ashore. Thus, it is with great respect and appreciation for their service that I am before you today to discuss Blue Tech on behalf of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, which represents the nation's leading ocean science, education, and technology institutions, industries, and others with the mission to shape the future of ocean science. Many of those institutions are represented on this panel today. There are three important ideas to take away from my testimony. One is that ocean knowledge enables the U.S. Coast Guard to achieve its missions through enhanced maritime domain awareness. Two, that Blue Tech is vital to understanding the ocean. Three is that Blue Tech innovation relies on ocean science, technology, engineering, and math education, or ocean STEM, as I call it. This flow from mission success, from ocean knowledge, from Blue Tech, from ocean STEM education, is the best way to understand how marine technologies not only improve efficiencies and performance, but are the very foundation that the Coast Guard relies on to meet its mandated missions now and in the future. Now I'm going to dive into my first two themes on ocean knowledge and Blue Tech as they enhance maritime domain awareness. The late Admiral James D. Watkins, former Chief of Naval Operations, used to declare that oceanography won the Cold War, meaning that our superior ocean knowledge provided us with operational and strategic advantage over the Soviet Union. It is paramount that the Coast Guard maintains its strategic advantage in the maritime domain against today's threats to our security and safety. Ocean research and Blue Tech provide the critical base to ensure this strategic advantage continues. We must be able to exploit our superior knowledge of the ocean environment to ensure home field advantage at both the home and away games. We can only do that if we have unsurpassed ocean knowledge, which brings me to the importance of Blue Tech. So how do we monitor, explore, map, and better understand the ocean environment that makes up 71% of our planet and surrounds our maritime nation? It's ocean science and technology. And Blue Tech has provided our nation with a knowledge advantage against a myriad marine threats. The Coast Guard, like all of our maritime forces, must optimize technological development to best understand the environment to meet its mission objectives while minimizing risk to personnel. For example, the autonomous ocean vehicles and sensors that we've talked about already today, with ever-increasing endurance and proliferation, enhance our ocean knowledge and understanding, but can also serve a dual use of surveillance and monitoring and of the activity on, under, and above the ocean surface. With collaborative partnerships among federal agencies, ocean science and technology institutions, and industry, these are essential to actualizing the potential of Blue Tech like this to fulfill the Coast Guard's missions. In my written testimony, I go into more detail on what it looks like in the real world with examples of how understanding the ocean and using Blue Tech will advance our nation, whether it's helping the Coast Guard to catch the vessels fishing around the world illegally in our own waters, or allowing us to safely and sustainably maximize new economic opportunities in the changing Arctic, or continuing to improve our preparations and responses to hurricanes and storms that threaten our safety and security. I'd be happy to expand more on those examples during questions. So it's clear to me, without continuing to grow our ocean STEM education base, the Coast Guard will be unable to maximize technology developments and meet their missions. Other nations are advancing rapidly with the hope of overtaking the U.S. in the global scientific and technical fields as a superpower. Increasing our ocean STEM education and training will ensure our sailors and civilians have the requisite skills to embrace new and emerging blue tech ahead of competing entities and threats. I encourage this committee to join others in supporting federal investments in the prioritization of STEM education to enable programs like those at the Coast Guard Academy and develop the next generation of maritime innovators and service members. It is really rather simple. Greater technology requires greater technicians, and that requires enhanced ocean STEM education. To respond to our ocean's physical, chemical, and biological changes while maintaining security around our geopolitical maritime boundaries and ensuring the safety and prosperity of those within them, the Coast Guard must know the ocean. Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members, the ocean science and technology community appreciates the interest of this subcommittee has in blue tech, and I want to reiterate those 3 points. Ocean knowledge enables the Coast Guard to achieve its missions through enhanced maritime domain awareness. Blue tech is vital to understanding the ocean, and blue tech innovation relies on ocean STEM education. I thank you for the time and the opportunity to be before you, and I'm ready to answer questions.
Admiral, thank you. I'm going to take us back to the late 90s when Coast Guard, or the Air Force was looking at these unmanned aerial vehicles, right? At that time, it was Predators. So picture a bunch of Air Force officers, mostly generals and colonels, all pilots, the head of the Air Force, and we come up and we say, hey, we'd like you guys to look at unmanned aerial vehicles. And they're like, what you mean, ones that we're not in, flying? We say, yeah, ones that you can fly from the ground that a 19-year-old can fly with an Xbox controller. How about those? And the Air Force said, go pound sand, or go pound clouds. I don't know what the Air Force says. But the Air Force said no because a bunch of pilots in the Air Force did not want an unmanned aerial vehicle. It was a culture shift for them. This Congress, and it was back in the day in the late 90s, the appropriators and the Armed Services Committee said, Air Force, you will have Predators. Here you go. Here's some Predators, learn how to do it. The Air Force had to accept that, and it was a massive culture change for them because they had a lot of excuses, airplanes hitting each other, not a real pilot flying them, a lot of different things. We now see in warfare what a Predator does, or a Scan Eagle, or a Pioneer, or any of these different things that we use to support our men and women around the world very inexpensively and effectively. That's where it seems like that's where the Coast Guard's at now. Except the analogy would be different. It would be if the commercial world had been using Predators for 5 years and the Air Force finally jumped on board. That's where the Coast Guard is now. So they're behind the commercial world, they're behind the Navy. They basically don't exist in this world at all except for looking at different programs and testing and evaluating. But they're not playing yet while this stuff is being used commercially. So it's gone backwards, and I guess our job in the committee and your job letting us know what's available is to make them adapt and change so that they can be more effective. So Admiral, I guess my first question to you is, you have things, you have RPVs, remotely piloted vehicles, unmanned underwater vehicles, autonomous vehicles. You have the liquid robotic surfboard, which can be maneuvered and is autonomous too. It can be programmed. You have an unmanned surface vehicle right now in San Diego and Point Loma that the Navy's using. It was going to be in the big, what's it called, RIMPAC coming up. They're going to actually use it, one of the first autonomous vehicles there. I guess I'm throwing this all at you, Admiral, to start off with, because you were in the Navy while they've gone through these kind of changes in culture of looking at these things as well. They're much more embracing of this, it seems, than the Coast Guard is. And I guess the question is, why is that? And what can we do in this committee to make the Coast Guard embrace what the Navy has and kind of get out of the culture of, wow, if we can't drive the boat, we don't want anybody to drive the boat. And I would end with this, at least for queuing. Meaning, foreseeing the bad guys driving north. You could put these surfboards, the Coast Guard could spend $20 million tomorrow and have a 50-mile line coming out from San Diego with surfboards that could recognize any ship going over 40 miles an hour. That exists very easily right now, that can tip and cue them then to go get it. Because that's the Coast Guard's reasoning is we can't catch these guys, we don't see half of them. When we see them, we can usually hit them. It's hard to see these Pango boats coming off the coast of California. You can create a tripwire really easily, not even in their concept of operations. They talk about it, but the technology has existed now for years and it's out there. They're not doing it. So I guess the question to you is, coming after 30 years in the Navy, being their oceanographer, being the guy watching the culture in the Navy, where is the Coast Guard in terms of culture? And is that what needs to be changed? Alluding to Mr. Garamondi's questions earlier, the last panel, is that what needs to be changed in the Coast Guard, or is it really, do they need to change laws and regulations and do these little things, or is it a personality issue?
I certainly won't perceive to have the knowledge that our predecessor on the panel does of the Coast Guard's acquisition and research process. But I will tell you that the Navy's is the strongest pretty much in the world. Over time, we have showed the innovation, whether it's submarines, it's landing airplanes on aircraft carriers, and many things that you have talked about. That ocean research enterprise that the Navy has put forward has really adopted transformational changes which have impacted all of these services. The Navy has always been committed to that. They spend a lot of money. They have a research development and transition enterprise that, again, is like none other. The Coast Guard and Navy work very closely, but in many ways, my own opinion is that the Coast Guard is always on the front lines. They are always right there. There are things going on our coast, and they are stretched because of the operational type of responses and the operational readiness and preparedness, semper paratus, that they always have to actually be there. I believe there are opportunities, as I mentioned in my testimony, of cross-agency working together in partnerships through things like the National Ocean Partnership Program Act, which was entered into authorization in the 1997 National Defense Authorization Act. Partnerships between the Department of Homeland Security, Transportation, DOD, NOAA, and others can advance the research and technology and transition if they are used appropriately, and I believe that's the type of avenue that you, sir, and your members and partners in Congress can go forward and try to advance the research, development, and acquisition process of the Coast Guard.
What would you say was the biggest impediment for the Navy when it came to doing an autonomous ship, for instance? Because I've been in a room where you have a bunch of captains going, we're not going to have a driverless ship. Every Navy ship will be captain. I mean, that was a culture issue.
And when Secretary Mabus made the announcement 4 years ago at Sea Air and Space that this was the F-35 would be the last generation of manned fighter aircraft, naval aviators' jaws dropped on the table, as you can imagine. So, but what you have, I think, is a workforce based in STEM education over many decades who understands the importance of embracing new ideas and technology. I think that's been the U.S. Navy's strength, especially now you see that more than ever. So I think embracing that culture and blending that culture with industry and the academic institutions, which the Navy also does through its Office of Naval Research and the laboratories that were actually talked about, that's how the Navy has managed to do that. But a lot of it is personality driven. In the U.S. Navy and the Coast Guard, I believe they have the right personality and the people in leadership to do that. It's just a matter of giving them the tools, the time, and the resources to do it right, sir.
So to extrapolate that on what you said, you're saying the Coast Guard is so operational all the time. It's your opinion that they don't necessarily have time to look into these things and operationalize them, or it takes longer, or?
Yes, sir. I believe they are stretched. I don't think they have the time or the resources, and I don't think we in the federal government have the partnerships across the agencies to be able to accelerate transitions of the great work that the other members on this panel are doing in industry and academics.
The catch-22 is if the Coast Guard did some of these things, they'd have more people to do other things, and the ability to have some space there because of the leverage you get by employing autonomous anything and sensors.
Yes, sir. But I'm always cautioned, but we did learn a hard lesson in the Navy early on. Unmanned doesn't mean totally unmanned. It takes people to operate these systems, more and more technology, more and more knowledge, as I talked about it as well. So I do caution you to not think too much that we're going to free up a lot of people, because there's plenty of mission for the Coast Guard, the Navy, and all of our forces out there, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Garamondi, you're recognized.
First, I want to thank the panel, an extraordinary panel, and a wide variety of information from basic research to applied, and then the actual business of building the various systems. It's extraordinary, and your testimony, probably 2 or 3 flights across the country for the chairman and I to absorb all of the data that you've given me. So thank you so very much for that. I've got about 20 different questions and about 5 minutes in which to ask all the questions. We're really honing in on the culture of the Coast Guard here. But before I go to that, your testimony and really your work is based upon the application of science and research, much of which is funded through the various federal organizations, National Science Foundation, for example, U.S. Navy, another example that was given here a moment ago. That's really beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but it is the application of those, of that science and the development of the various techniques and technologies that have come from it that we're focused on, and most particularly on the culture of the Coast Guard. I'm sorry that the Admiral left, but the reality is that there is within the Coast Guard 2 things operating, it seems to me. First, the culture is not one of adapting quickly new techniques and technologies. And secondly, a lack of money to do so if, in fact, that culture did exist. So my questions go to, from your points of view and the work that you do, how can we encourage the Coast Guard to more quickly adopt the systems that you have developed, the research that you may have available, and just that area? So how can we motivate change or otherwise encourage the Coast Guard to be a first adopter of a technology? Dr. Terrell, and right on down the line, we can go at it.
Sure.
Money, okay.
Well, I'm not prepared to discuss procurement reform, but as an observation, what I've seen in the Department of Defense, especially those parts of the Department of Defense with seawater in their veins, is that they organize vertically integrated programs that bring together the operational fleet all the way down to the R&D community as part of these test beds or exercises that provide opportunities to demonstrate technologies to those in uniform, having them work together so that there's early adoption within those with uniforms so that they can be the apostles within their own organization to start. Many times there's not an awareness of what the capabilities are, and having opportunities for the young lieutenants to actually be observant of the capabilities goes a long way, at least within the Navy.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
So we're not really the National Science Foundation level. We're talking about companies that are selling technologies. And my experience is the Coast Guard is extraordinarily operationally oriented. And so to try and get the attention of people in various areas is very difficult. They want it to go through New London. And I think one of the things that could be done, again, this is a cultural issue, is to encourage them to be looking for technologies and to give them an opportunity to meet with industry. I had a former Coast Guard officer say to me that some years ago he felt that there was it was much easier for him to work with and meet with technology companies, and that they no longer have their tech forum, which they used to have 5 years ago, 6 years ago. They're no longer encouraged the same way. Again, this is somebody telling me, so I'm saying this third hand, that he felt like there wasn't the same exchange of information and opportunity between industry and Coast Guard. And again, that's a cultural issue. So what I proposed was that each sector have people whose job it is, maybe it's 15% of the deputy commander's off a job, to go find technology, meet with industry, so they can funnel it up to New London rather than having it all centralized and potentially putting something on the West Coast. So I think there are cultural things that, notwithstanding the fact it's an extraordinary and operational, every day, saving a life, plus its military role, I think there are things that can and should be done.
Mr. Chance.
Sure, I would certainly second what you just said on the concept of having somebody concentrate on that, on meeting with industry and finding out what is available today. I would also say that this hearing is already having its effect. You know, I'm looking at it aggressively, which I probably didn't as much as I should have in the past, and now we're lining up meetings with the Coast Guard, RD and T&E. And seeing the funding that the Coast Guard has gotten more recently to be able to push in this direction is certainly going to help hugely.
Thank you.
I can't speak necessarily to the culture of the Coast Guard, but I can say that some of the challenges that the Coast Guard probably faces in implementing some of this new technology, you see that same hesitancy within the tech community and the investment community, and the potential of the blue economy. And so trying to get IBMs and the Intels and the Oracles of the world to take those lessons learned in emerging technology and apply them to the ocean, the investment community has been a Herculean task, and I've only been doing this for a year, but that also allows for an enormous amount of opportunity to address those problems.
Thank you. Professor?
Thank you for this question. I've spent the last 25 years of my career developing software tools that I thought could be useful for many entities or industries. And every time I tried to take these tools to these entities or industries, I got resistance. I found that the path past that resistance in almost every single instance has been the idea that these tools should be co-developed, that the stakeholders should be involved in the development process through the development process. And also, the second piece has been educational partnerships, where folks are brought together and brought along. Perhaps that could be one of the ways in which we could encourage industry, academia, and the Coast Guard to work together to really understand what the key issues are, the barriers are that are preventing adoption, and work our way past those together.
Admiral?
I said a lot already. I'll just say that the Coast Guard has been successful in many areas of innovating. Look at the work they've done at the Joint Interagency Task Force in combating a lot of transnational criminal activities through information surveillance, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Look at the work they've done against illegal fishing activities such as high seas drift nets, going backward, and more modern entities as well. The Coast Guard can and does innovate. I still get back to, I think in many ways, it's a problem of resources, and that you've got to invest the resources up front in the longer term rapid transition of the tech that is out there. But I know we all believe it's something that has to be done, so I think we need to look hard at the resources that are available to the Coast Guard to work in partnership with the Navy and the others to address these gaps, sir.
It would be a serious error for me to try to sum up all that you said, but it seems to me that there are a couple of things here. First of all, the culture of the Coast Guard. Take care of today's problem, operational words that are used. That, I think, goes to the incentives of the, if promotion included innovation, the innovation of an officer or of any individual, of the 42,000, if their promotion also included their interest in innovation and bringing innovation online. So now you build a different cultural attitude. Secondly, the resource, which is a problem that the Coast Guard does have to deal with. I guess we have to deal with it. And we noted the 47% reduction in the research technology. And the third is interaction with other governmental agencies. Seem to be the three lessons that I would draw from this. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'd like to differentiate, too, between super high-tech stuff that is in its infancy stages and is nascent, and a floating surfboard that can sense if there's oil in the water that's been around for 5 years or longer than that, actually. I just saw it 5, 6 years ago. That's not rocket science. And just in the same way, if you look at the southern border and you have a border fence now, you have basically an obstacle plan, and what's allowed the Border Patrol to do is spread their people out, because there's a high-speed road and a fence. So if someone sees something, someone can get there in 1 minute on a quad, they can cover a mile in 30 seconds, and they're there. It's the same with the Coast Guard. I don't get the adapting of new things when it's really just a surfboard that can cue you on a ship coming at 50 miles an hour or a storm or oil in the water. That's not rocket science. That's not crazy, and it's not even new anymore. But when it takes the Coast Guard 5 years to put a loudspeaker on a small cutter, we're looking at decades before they will allow a surfboard with a sensor that costs $500,000. We're not even talking big money either. We're talking small money in terms of being efficient and effective. With that, Mr. Lowenthal, you're recognized for your statement or for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the panelists for being here. I just wanted to mention first, and then I'll have some questions, that I represent the port area of Long Beach, California, which is right adjacent to LA. And so I've had the good pleasure of visiting with the port pilots, the CDIP buoy network in the San Pedro Bay. And I know the value of the information that these devices both collect to our ports pilots and to researchers, oceanographic researchers, and to the entire maritime community. And so every year I lead a letter in the Congress supporting robust appropriation for the CDIP program. And also another program which I'm so impressed with also is one that I think Dr. Terrell at Scripps really led the effort, and that's the Underkeel Clearance Precision Navigation project. You know, we have these huge tankers coming in, and, you know, the ability to get in and out of our ports with very, very little clearance is so, so important. And it really, the more we can do that, that reduces the inefficiency of offshore lightering, which is something we'd like to eliminate or do as much as possible, because that just adds another step and another danger to the process. But I want to get back to the testimony of Dr. Özkan Haller and all the others about partnerships across government agencies. You've all talked about, I think, academia, the private sector, how we need these robust initiatives connected across these multiple entities and geographic. I want to know, what can the Congress do about that? What do you think, if you were going to advise us to take some very concrete steps to promote the partnerships that you're talking about? Could you give us some, just dig a little deeper and give us some examples of what you'd like us to do?
Thank you very much for this excellent question. Partnerships between federal agencies are really key, and they are key not just for the problem that you just mentioned, but for a variety of other problems that are related to the coastal zone, be it, for instance, coastal flooding due to storm events, or be it energy production from waves or tidal currents, so across the coastal zone. I think, you know, I've always felt that I've been very fortunate to work in a field where there are multiple federal agencies interested in funding research and development. That's great. You can really expand your portfolio. But at the same time, sometimes certain tasks fall through the cracks, where no one agency feels, especially mission agencies, feel like it falls squarely within their purview to get something done. Mm-hmm. And sometimes some of the supplied work that we've been talking about, some of this transitioning the research into the hands of the folks who would actually use it, tends to fall through the cracks. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to stress how important it is to make the strategic investment in the technology development piece, in the actual transition, that last missing link, to really make it easy for folks on the ground to utilize these. Admiral White mentioned the National Oceanographic Partnership Program. I'm part of the Ocean Studies Board of the National Academies, and as part of that, we talk about that program a lot as a potential conduit for getting agencies to work together. There has been some resistance in doing so, partially, I think, because of who's in the leadership position of the NOP program at any given time. I've been told there are only two ways to get agencies to work together, and you all can tell me if this is correct or not. One is they're all buddies and friends and they get along, and so therefore they work together anyways, mm-hmm. or otherwise they have to be told from above to work together. So maybe that is a place where this committee can come in. Thanks for the opportunity.
So we're the tellers. You know, we have to. Anybody else want to add something to that in terms of how we create, or really how the role that the Congress should play in fostering and promoting partnerships, especially across federal agencies? Yes, Admiral White.
Thank you, sir. I should mention that there has been a piece of legislation that's been entered into the process, I believe, by Congressman Panetta and Congressman Palazzo, called Commercial Engagement Through Ocean Technology Act of 2018. It's CNOTE by short. This is an act that is meant to basically make NOAA work more closely with Navy to test and develop autonomous vehicles and other blue tech that we've talked about today. The Coast Guard is not called out in that specific piece of legislation right now. But that type of legislation, I would encourage you to take a look at it. Is it something that you might want to look at with the Coast Guard? But those type of vehicles...
That would be one of the vehicles that you're talking about that would foster that kind of relationship between NOAA and the other agencies.
Yes, sir. It would be a teller type of role that you'd be playing. The same with NOT, by the way, which again is an act from the year of 1996, but you know, could use probably a fresh look and some fresh telling as well.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Jones.
I assume that you're involved as you're naming new commandants and people like that, and to the extent that you ask questions about innovation and technology, I think that's a very telling, particularly for younger officers as they're coming up, as they see that that is an area of particular interest. And I'd like just note that the new Vice Commandant, Charlie Ray, did come down, and we put on an event for him. I think we had 10 companies present. He said he'd never done that before. And he was fabulous. Not only did he make a lot of companies really feel good that he wanted to be open, he brought people with him that followed up. And that kind of regional interface, the ability to talk to industry, to know that leadership is interested, again, thinking of these innovation councils going on a regional basis, I think could have a lot of benefit. Also, younger officers can get involved. So I think that things can be done without great cost that can really help change, but particularly when you make that an issue at approval levels, the highest levels.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to ask a really quick question before we go to Ms. Plaskett. Is there a kind of symposium that the Coast Guard has every year? Like the Army has a big AUSA convention where every tactical killing thing known to mankind is there at the convention center here. The Marine Corps does the same thing. The Air Force has big safari. The Navy's got a big symposium. Have any of you been invited to the Coast Guard technology symposiums on stuff that's out there?
So I'm told the last one was 5 or 6 years ago.
That's good.
Nothing's
happened since then.
I'm sorry?
Nothing's happened technologically in 5 or 6 years, so that's understandable.
I have a feeling it was probably cost-driven, but they had contracted with NDIA to do a innovation forum. And I think one other way to address that, rather than putting on their own forum, let's say in Washington, D.C., a lot of the smaller companies don't necessarily know about it. And maybe the way to address it is to have officers go to tech forums in parts of the United States. So it reduces their cost, and they can go where technologies already are being shown.
Yes, Doctor.
I would also argue that certainly the Coast Guard, the local Coast Guard officers that are within my area, the mouth of the Columbia River and other treacherous inlets in the Pacific Northwest, do interact with companies as well as with academic institutions, but at a much more local scale than what you are referring to. But those interactions clearly, I think, are also useful.
And there's a different dynamic, too, because if you're in San Diego and you make a new thing for the Marines, you can go to Camp Pendleton, give a regiment or a battalion that's deploying the gear, and they can go deploy with it and actually test it, do operational testing, and come back. The Coast Guard cannot do that. They don't have the rules and regulations set up. So even for my loudspeaker example, the LRAD, they had to go up all the way through, I think, at the admiral level or the captain level in the Coast Guard to be able to put that on a small cutter in San Diego in order to test it. It wasn't just a thing that the local commander there could say, hey, guys, we're going to test a loudspeaker, pop it on one of the cutters. They had to get a person who specializes in that, who's already done it in Florida, and then took that. It's not easy at all, actually, at the local level or at the small unit leader level. So, Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized. Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Chance, I wanted to ask you a question. You all were at the first panel and the discussion that was had at that time. I had a discussion with the testifier then about the use of technology with the Coast Guard in terms of interdictions on drugs and weapons. He talked quite a bit about unmanned aerial systems and their relationship with other law enforcement entities. What would be the use and the efficacy of using UUVs as well as USVs in this area? Is that a possibility?
Sure. USVs, which is my area of expertise, I can tell you would lend itself tremendously. For example, we're now converting a 38-foot patrol craft to optionally unmanned that can stay and loiter offshore for weeks at a time, running a radar, looking for vessels that need to be investigated. So this vessel and the data on board would be monitored back at a control center on shore or even on a Coast Guard cutter. And so if the Coast Guard decides that they want to investigate, they can dispatch that vessel out and be able to interrogate it via the satellite base through the link to the VHF radio and actually talk to that vessel, or if they can't communicate that way, through a hailer and then over the satellite link. And if necessary, they can even, as I mentioned in my testimony, deploy a net system that entangles in the prop that will stop that vessel until the Coast Guard can reach them and investigate that situation.
Interesting, really great. Thank you. I had a second question for Admiral White. This was with regard to the investment that's being made. Do you happen to have any statistics or information that speaks to the amount of venture capital that is being invested in the types of technology that you discussed in various blue technology and its growth?
I do not have those at my fingertips, ma'am. I apologize, but I will get an analysis of that for you and get it back
Would
to
you say that the magnitude of that is how much less that is than space or other areas, or what are the ways that we can get VC funding into this area?
I'll go back to the comments by one of my cohorts on this panel, is that I think that it is absolutely, there is an order of magnitude difference in the investment that we were making in exploring space and trying to understand what's going on in oceans on planets that we will never live on for many generations at least, whereas we need to pay more attention to the own ocean and our own inner space that we have here. It is an order of magnitude difference in terms of technology.
Is there a role that Congress can play in incentivizing or getting the private sector and these venture capital groups, private equity groups, to be engaged in this?
I think working across the various committees between your committee, looking at the science committee, all the actual committees, and focusing and really trying to balance what's really important to our population right now. And the maritime and maritime transportation, maritime safety and security environment has to be paramount for the reasons that we've all talked about. And I just believe you can help elevate sort of the understanding, not just by the folks here in D.C., but by our population writ large. We all love space. We all want to be Captain Kirk, which means it's either a Navy or a Coast Guard.
Or Uhuru in some of our instances.
Even better. But as we do that, we need to understand that it's a change in perception of that. It's a level of importance, and that's through ocean literacy and ocean understanding and the STEM, ocean STEM that I talked about, which would drive education of the next generation of our maritime nation. We should be vested in ocean STEM as a mandate to drive this type of discourse going forward, ma'am. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And that actually leads to my second question I had, and we talked about the private sector. I wanted to talk about education. The Virgin Islands has one of the premier maritime or marine biology programs. But in other areas related to ocean STEM, I think that there's a dearth of degree options, of areas that young people can go into. Particularly, my question was, are there ways that we've tried to increase communities of color or other minorities, African American, people of color, Latinos, in this area, and what are the ways that we can drive interest for individuals who live on the coast, communities of color that are tremendously affected by food insecurities, climate change that is affected by the oceans. Does anyone on the panel have any thoughts, please?
First, to your first question, there is not one blue tech investment fund in the United States today. There is not one. There are a number of people focused on space, but there's not one venture fund in the United States that's really focused on blue tech. We're doing our third year as part of Blue Tech Week, a Blue Tech Pitch Fest, and we are reaching out around the United States. So I think there are roles where the SBA and other agencies could try and help fund organizations that would invest in blue tech companies. Related to education, we this year have a major effort in particular to reach out to underserved communities. In a place like San Diego, where the cost of housing is very high, it's very hard to bring somebody in and technical workers. So we believe that we're going to have to grow our own entrepreneurs and our own technical workers. So we have started a internship program with heavy emphasis on underserved communities. We got some funding from a local foundation. We have just started an immersion program. It'll be a pilot program. This year we'll do 2 weeks. We also started a Blue STEM. We used to call it Ocean STEM, but we want to be more comprehensive than that. So we're talking Blue STEM with the San Diego Unified School District. We've picked a middle school and a high school. We're creating an academy and a workforce pathway. We're working with our workforce development agency, with all of our universities to really start at the earliest levels. And once we can create a replicable model, we plan to put it all across San Diego County and then across the country. So it's something that we are spending a lot of time on, is this whole component of education. We know it's critically important to bring females and other underserved communities into this.
Mr. Coyle?
Can I get back to your investment question? I think there, as Mr. Jones mentioned about there's no blue tech fund. I think that's one avenue in terms of whether it's sovereign wealth management, asset management, private equity, venture capital. There's huge opportunity on that. I was just out at a conference in Santa Monica about what's being done in that regard in the Middle East. I was just at a conference 2 weeks ago at Yale University on the impact investment side, which is looking at how do you make profit and do good in the same equation. And if you look at the chairman of BlackRock, I think sending the CEOs letters about maybe a month ago, that their portfolio companies not only have to make profit, but actually have to make an impact. That is fundamental. When you've got one of the biggest asset management companies in the world, you've got the investment community. There were plenty of Wall Streeters that were there, banks that are now fundamentally looking at this as not as just donating to a nonprofit, is how do we use technology to return profit and make societal difference. That's fundamental. That's not happened in the investment community. And so I think there's a role that government can play in incentivizing the investment community to pay more attention to emerging blue technology.
Okay. Yes.
For 21 years, there's been the National Ocean Sciences Bowl, started by Admiral Watkins again. It's a high school ocean quiz bowl competition. It brings together multi-regions across states around the country, not just coastal, but Idaho and Colorado. And this is a high school quiz bowl that unfortunately is not being utilized to its full potential today. It was actually designed to be run by a combination of resources from multiple federal ocean agencies under the NOP Act originally. This is an opportunity to work with aquariums in inner cities and underrepresented populations to grow not just at the high school, but even the middle school level, and really use the ocean, because the aquariums in parks, ocean attracts people. They want to engage in understanding it. We have a great opportunity through this program and other programs being run through the education partnerships and through other agencies. Not enough attention is being paid to this, in my opinion, writ large, and it will be a great opportunity to ask some hard questions of the agency. You've got tools out there. Why are you not utilizing them to their fullest potential?
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask these questions. And Mr. Jones, I think that the island of St. John, where we're actually about to rebuild our school, would be a great place for you to try another pilot out for these young people. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentle lady. If there's no further questions, I thank all the witnesses for their testimony, the members for their participation. The subcommittee is adjourned.